Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Um, thank you for joining us for this session with Pat McCabe, Living with, for, as Earth. If you were lucky enough to join us for the opening ceremony, you were probably moved to tears, as I was. Would like to tell you a little bit about Pat McCabe. Pat is her native name. Woman Stands Shining is a Dene, Navajo, mother, grandmother, activist, artist, writer, ceremonial leader, and international speaker. She is a voice for global peace, and her paintings are created as tools for individual, earth, and global healing. She draws upon the indigenous science of thriving life to reframe questions about sustainability and balance, and she is devoted to supporting the next generations, woman's nation and men's nation, in being functional members for the hoop of life and upholding the honor of being human. Her primary work today at this moment, is the reconciliation between the masculine and the feminine, men's nation and women's nation, remembering, recreating, or creating anew a narrative for the sacred masculine, and addressing the archetypal wounding that occurred in our misunderstanding and abuse of technology in prayer, ceremony, and science. So with that, I'd like to call up Pat and welcome, Pat. It's such an honor to be with you and share this space with you. And again, about the opening ceremony, if you saw it, it was very moving. And I wanted to thank you, Pat, for bringing us into that sacred space with you in solidarity and in honoring of Indigenous people and what they've experienced. And wanted to ask you about the opening ceremony and the beautiful song that you shared with us. Can you share us more about what you were invoking, what you were calling to bear in the ceremony?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm very honored to be here, and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I just want to give a little bit of a traditional greeting here. So I'll say, as Jennifer said, I'm from Dene Nation, and so I'll say, She'e'iya, tachi inishli, aro ashi ibashishchi, ma'adishkejne dashinale, klauschi daushiche, kwatawastani inishli. So I'm telling you about my clans. We get our clans from our mothers, and I also was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and in that way I was given the name Wiyakpa Najinwi, which translates roughly to woman standing shining. So just greeting you here. I'm actually in California today. Normally I'm living with my mom in New Mexico, and my own home is up in Taos. But to go back to the opening ceremony, I just want to say that I'm so grateful that to have had that opportunity to make that prayer together with all of you, and for this CONSPIRE gathering and conference, and in particular in conjunction with the work of Father Richard Rohr. You know, when I was invited to do opening blessing, I really felt that you know, the CONSPIRE conference, this annual conference, goes out of its way to engage with Indigenous people, by way of, you know, opening and a land acknowledgement, and that's a beautiful first step. But it occurred to me in this particular moment that we had an opportunity here to do something far beyond that, far beyond that. Because in this moment, like I said, you know, Indigenous communities all throughout what we now call North America have been rocked, really deeply rocked by these events of finding these mass graves at the residential boarding schools that were run primarily, well, the ones that they've been exploring mostly have been from ones that were run by the Catholic Church, sponsored by the Catholic Church. And so we've kind of been re-shocked, you know. As I said, it's not that we didn't know these things were happening, but that the deep atrocities were happening because these were the stories of our parents and grandparents. They were describing to us what was taking place when they were taken to these residential boarding schools. So for those of you who don't know, you know, in the United States anyway, I'm not really sure what the legalities of it were in Canada, but in the United States, it was law that anybody could grab any Native child they saw anywhere and just take them to these schools. That was the place where Native children were supposed to be by law. So you can imagine the difficulty of that. So we had this. We've all been living. My grandparents and parents went to residential boarding schools. The ones they went to were run by the Dutch Christian Reform missionaries, and so that's like very, very personal history for me. And probably any indigenous person from North America that you meet has been deeply, deeply affected by policy, that policy. And so, what I was feeling like is this is an opportunity. Now, I appreciate that you say, Jennifer, that, this is an opportunity to stand in solidarity with indigenous peoples. But what I want to point out, and this is what I felt the opportunity was the indigenous peoples have been aware of this. What's new is the co-witnessing from the rest of the world. And that's also what's bringing up all this emotion, is to finally really be seen and heard. Like, people all over the world are expressing shock and learning for the first time about these events of Canadian history and U.S. history, and not understanding that that's how these nations were founded. And so this co-witnessing is this moment of, one, shock, grief, agony in many ways. But it's not only it shouldn't only be on the indigenous side, and I'm witnessing that it's not. That for once, we're not the only ones holding that shock and grief. That there are others who are in shock and grief as well. So that's new. And so what the opportunity, it seemed to me here, was that, it's not about just turning it over to the indigenous person to say, once again, these terrible things happened, but it was an opportunity for the church or the representatives of, through this conference, to also be able to acknowledge what took place, to also be able to acknowledge their shock and grief. And so that was the invitation that I made to Richard, because Father Richard is, I said, he said, well, we'll just go for it, Pat. And I said, well, we could do it that way, but I think this is an opportunity for the church to step in as well. So this was really the prayer, and the really transformative moment that came for me in this whole process leading up to that opening ceremony and that opening prayer was, when I was talking about what the church had to lose. The church lost its honor through those actions, through their participation in such devastating and murder, taking part in genocide. So the church, I feel, lost its honor, broke its pact to be sanctuary, to be refuge. How can you be committing these actions and be sanctuary and refuge? It can't work. It can't go together. Also, broke its pact to be a peacemaker. But the hardest part, I think, is that it lost its opportunity to create the circumstances for grace and healing to come to humanity. And this is something that we share in our spiritual paths. Indigenous peoples' spiritual lives are all about creating that opportunity for grace and for deep insight and information and healing to come to this Mother Earth, to keep us in harmony, with this life. And so it was really, going through that list of losses. That's also not anything new, but what happened for me that was new was, in saying those things, this opening came for the first time in my life of where I was able to say, and what would it be like if the church truly was honorable again? What would it be like if the church did hold its pact to be refuge and sanctuary? What would it be like if the church was able to fully reclaim its ability to create the circumstances for grace and healing to appear and to be a part of humanity's healing at this time? And wow, that was such a flip for me because because of the history, I've been in such deep critique of the church at large, and so to step into this vision of this possibility of, wow, what would that be like? What would this earth be like if that could happen. And so that's really where that prayer was coming from, was that flip. And I'll say that it wasn't so little, that flip in understanding um, is going to begin to be applied for me in many different areas. So there's an opening there. And the final thing I'll say before we move on to our actual topic of this session is I want to acknowledge that there are many indigenous peoples who are of the Christian faith at this time. And that's a little controversial among us in some ways, because for some indigenous peoples it feels as though we we bought into, if you will, the trappings of this particular aspect of colonization. But I want to say, for my own family and in general, that, I found refuge with the Christ myself in my own life, and I still do. When I have to do a lot of work around trauma all the time in order to be able to sit and present like I'm about to do here. It's not easy for me to just come and sit here. There's a lot of work that has to happen in order for me to be able to maintain that place inside of myself. And so, as I'm working with my youngest beings who got to experience the fallout from attempted genocide through the actual events of my family, Christ comes at that moment with these little children that live inside of me, and they're the only ones. He's the only one that they trust. So what I would say to the indigenous people, if there are any indigenous people watching, is that I honor that path also, and I would not want to take that away from our people who have found that way and have found their refuge there, have found something that gives them peace. And it's also a pretty difficult situation. So I just say congratulations to this CONSPIRE gathering and those who are organizing, and all the conversations that we had that led up to that opening ceremony, because I feel like we did something there. We did something that is going to change consciousness and open a pathway for something new.
Thank you, Pat. You had many of us in tears. Opening ceremony was also an opening of the heart, I felt. What would it be like? What a great anchoring question to actually be true sanctuary, to be true love, to honor that pact, and to bear witness together of the history and to recreate anew. Thank you so much. You gave us the title of your talk, Living with, for, as Earth. I just need to breathe this in for a minute. Oh my gosh, so powerful. Can you talk to us about the title and what you mean and what the invitation is in it and in this talk?
Yeah, thank you. So again, I say welcome to each and every one who found their way here. I'm going to ask us to step into and feel that it's no accident that we're meeting here right now at this time and in this way and in this place. So I chose this topic as a way of looking at consciousness. And one thing that I've been saying is, okay, so there's a couple of founding principles that will help, hopefully, to be able to receive what I want to say here, because I'm speaking from a very different worldview than modern world paradigm. So this is what I've been noticing about myself is, for a long time, I felt like, the proverbial living in two worlds was very tearing, very difficult to manage. And it's taken, as I say, it takes a lot of work to do that. But today, I will say that I trust all the events of my life. I trust that Spirit had me set up in a very specific school that would lead me to even this very moment, to this day of speaking here at this CONSPIRE gathering. And so I have huge trust for that now. And part of that setup, if you will, is that I've been given this enormous privilege. It's an enormous privilege to hold, not just hold, but see through and live two very, very different ways, different understandings of how to be human on this Mother Earth. So to carry two different worldviews, there's a constant sense that we get. I mean, I have to choose in every moment, which paradigm am I going to operate out of? How can I best serve life, light, and love? From which paradigm should I be working out of? And I feel like my whole life is actually about translating between these two understandings of how to be human, these two different paradigms. And what I feel is that choice between these two worldviews actually speaks to the possibility that maybe there's more than these two choices, even. Maybe it's not just indigenous paradigm and modern world paradigm, but maybe there's there's many more. And in fact, that's what my spiritual guidance has said to me, is that, you humans, you can have it any way you want it. You can have it any way you want it. And right now you're saying you want it like this. But you can have it any way you want it. And so I feel like with that proposition, I can be useful, I can be helpful by describing an understanding of how to be human. I can describe something from indigenous paradigm, from the cultures that I hold, as sort of an exhibit A, right, to modern world. Because modern world is questioning, where are we going? Why is this moving this way? Why all the suffering? Why all the death? Why is this earth dying? So modern world paradigm is in a place of deep, deep questioning. And so there's a willingness to self-examine in a way that perhaps has never, well, certainly not in my lifetime, has happened before, or even many lifetimes, I would say, hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. And so all of a sudden there's this possibility of self-reflection. And so what I feel like I have an opportunity to offer is to say, okay, it's true. That is not the only way to go about being here. And in fact, I can point to a very concrete example, which is, look at how certain indigenous peoples are going about being human on this Mother Earth. And notice what happens with the way that they've chosen. And what are the principles that they hold? And how is that working for them? So it's not to say, this is it. Although there are reasons why I think it's important for us to look at indigenous paradigm. But to be able to compare and contrast. And what I hope will happen by me presenting from my culture is that it will feed the imagination of those who have only had modern world paradigm to choose from. Because I realize not everybody is in my position, and this is why I say it's a privilege. That if you are born into modern world paradigm, if you come from multi-generations of people who have been embedded in modern world paradigm, how are you going to know that there's anything other than that? I feel like as I look around the world, people are saying to themselves, well, that's just the way the earth is. Wall Street, that's what naturally arises out of this earth. Pharmaceutical companies, that's what naturally arises here. All the many different systems. Capitalism, that's just the way the earth is. And it's like, well, actually, no, those are very specific choices. Those are very specific choices that we have made. And so when I feel like when I point to my own culture, I'm showing that, well, look at these people. And the thing about, it's not just my cultures, Lakota, Dene, we can find these indigenous peoples everywhere on the planet in all different forms. Now, the reason I think it's important to look at these cultures is because I say, if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, which arguably I'll still stand by that. Yes, if sustainability is the most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time. What's an extended period of time? 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years in relative health, harmony, and happiness. Now, maybe not everybody here knows, but there are peoples who claim being in place for 15,000 years. Modern science doesn't acknowledge those people. Modern science doesn't talk about those things. But that's our science holds a very, very long story, much longer than modern world science. Although modern world science keeps pushing back, if we notice, the date of when civilization began. First it was 5,000 years, then it had to go to 12,000 years with discoveries in Turkey, and then here in this continent of the what we now call the Americas, it's getting pushed back to 20,000 years and such. So it just keeps going, right? So that science is starting to catch up with our understanding. So I feel like it's really important for us to consider, what are the stories that we're living out of? So I wanted to bring in something that has been said to me that I've been exploring for a while here, which is, I'm told that as the female of our kind, I am synonymous with earth. I'm synonymous with life. So just take a couple breaths with that. As the female of our kind, I am synonymous with life. I am synonymous with earth. So I want to describe a little bit about what that has come to mean for me and what it says about the possibilities. So I, in the Lakota way, spiritual way and teaching, I was presented with something called people call it the medicine wheel. And unfortunately, I'm traveling and I didn't bring my little example, but it's a circle. And it's marking north to south and east to west in the center of it. So it's a circle with the symbols of those two roads crossing in the middle. Now, there's lots of different ways to look at that. It points to the cardinal directions, and we say that different medicines, different animals, different spiritual entities lie in each of those four directions. And depending on which indigenous people you talk to, they'll name different ones. And it's all true. That's another thing in modern world paradigm has a hard time holding. Like there's only, we get dogmatic about things, but for us we can say, it's all true. But I won't get into that right now. So anyways, in each of the four directions, there's different medicines, different animals, different spiritual helpers. We can also talk about this hoop being divided into four as the four different parts of walking through your life as a human being, as a child, as a young adult, as someone who can bring family, and then your elder years, right? But another way that I look at it is that every single living life form has been given a seat on this sacred hoop of life, right? And every single life form, and that includes us, that includes the five-fingered ones. So we also get to have a seat on that sacred hoop. Every single member has a methodology for upholding its part of the sacred hoop. And every single member must uphold their part of the sacred hoop, or the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And that's what I believe we're witnessing right now. And who's not upholding their part of the sacred hoop? Well, I think it's us. Now, if I'm looking at it from this vantage point, the thing about this sacred hoop is it's really speaking to a very deep level of interrelatedness. and I really love Thicht Nacht Hahn's word. You know, it's hard to make English into indigenous concepts, but he has this great word. He calls us interbeing. We're interbeing, and that's exactly what this hoop is describing. So, from this perspective, every member counts, and every member has to be given the opportunity to uphold its part of the hoop, and every member has been given a perfect design to do that. The question is every member being given what they need in order to enact their perfect design for thriving life, so that they can contribute to keeping the integrity of that hoop intact? I'm going to say no. So when we dam rivers, we begin to prevent certain life forms from being able to enact their perfect design for thriving life. The salmon. If the salmon can't live their way, then the whole ecology begins to unravel where they are. And there's this incredible film that shows what happens when, because wolves were being kept out of Yellowstone National Park here in North America. And there's this incredible film that shows what happens when they reintroduce wolves back into that habitat where they had always been. The whole ecology changes. I mean, it's hard for us to be able to imagine how that can be. But there's this document, it's documenting that process. And so every being has to be allowed to enact its perfect design for thriving life, or the whole thing begins to unravel. So I'm going to bring it back to humanity and bring it back to the female of our kind. So I asked myself, am I, as human being, enacting my perfect design for thriving life? Am I or am I not? How would I know? And another part of that question that I chose to take on was, and what is it about being the female of our kind? What is my perfect design as the female of our kind? And so with that inquiry, many things began to appear as I began to bring that into prayer. But before I go there, what I want to say is that the first thing I had to notice is that with the oppression of the female of our kind all around the world, in most every culture at this point, even in indigenous cultures, I'm going to say, because with that colonization mindset in which the feminine was being deeply suppressed, or before the Europeans came to this continent, there was this very serious business of the so-called witch hunts taking place for hundreds of years in Europe. That suppression was deep and violent and brutal. So that mindset, when it came over here, and as that colonization began to have its work as attempted genocide on indigenous cultures, I feel that that way of thinking was part of the toxicity that was inserted into indigenous communities as well. So our ethic and our principle is to give the women a very high place, but whether that is being truly enacted now is sporadic, I will say, in my experience. So what happens if the female of our kind is suppressed? What if we are never allowed to understand our full capacity and what we bring to bear to make this whole thriving life hoop come into its highest fruition? And so I began to think about this and inquire about it. And so there's quite a bit that I have come to learn about this. And remaking the story of what it is to be the female of our kind. Part of that has to do with my biology. I say my biology gives me a spiritual capacity. So as you're listening to me talk about the female of our kind, I'm using this as an example, my personal inquiry example. But we could ask this, obviously, about the male of our kind, of the two-spirit of our kind, of different ages in our species. What is it about the elder woman? Was it about the young man? What are the roles that we're needing to have in order to fully be able to enact our design for perfect, for a perfect design for thriving life? So I'm speaking about this one example, pulling one example out of our thread, and asking about this. So all of this teaching from indigenous culture says I'm synonymous with life. I'm synonymous with earth. So if that's true, how I get treated that treatment is also going to show up synonymous with how we treat earth and how we treat life. So I'm sort of in that sense, I'm a canary in the coal mine here. How I'm doing says a lot about how we're doing. That's how interrelated we are. And so I'm not going to go into a full moontime teaching, but I will say that one of the things that I came to understand is that during my moontime, or my menstruation time, as a younger woman, that time has passed now, I had a capacity to be able to commune with earth in a very particular way. Visions and dreams could come easily during that time. And if I focused my attention on the Mother Earth, she has the ability to give me direct instruction for how to be here. And she does it through symbology, she does it through dreams, she does it through vision. Sometimes she does it through songs. There are songs that I received that I still sing to this day. So that's a possibility for human capacity that I was never taught in modern world paradigm. In modern world paradigm, and even today it's fiercer than it has ever been, we are taught that I'm gonna break us into binary here for just a moment. My apologies. I understand that this is not the whole story. But I was taught that men and women are equal. And the misunderstanding there is that men and women are the same. And I'm going to say that I'm not someone who goes along with this idea that gender is purely a cultural construct. There are those of us who menstruate and those of us who do not menstruate. And there is something about that process that gives me a capacity that those who are not in that position, they have other capacities, but they don't have that one. So there's something very special about this. And I'm going to say that, I think that we have a deep fear of diversity right now. I've had people come up to me after my talks and say to me, I can't wait until we're all just light brown. Meaning, I can't wait until we've all intermarried so much that there are no racial markers. There's no skin tone marker among us. And I believe the reason that they say that to me is they think that that's going to be the day that we get to have peace, because there won't be any differences between us. I find that. I understand it, and I also find it pretty shocking. That is ethnic cleansing. We're saying we can't have peace until we have complete ethnic cleansing. And yet, if we look at the Mother Earth and all of her diversity, and even science is agreeing with this, we're finding that diversity is the key to healthy life and ecosystems. So I'm going to say the same with gender. It's not about trying to erase gender, but it can be about looking at gender from a completely different place. So what my spiritual guidance said to me was, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you don't. All you know is how those two energetics behave in a power over paradigm, modern world paradigm. But if you plug those two energetics into a different paradigm, into a different narrative, into a different understanding of how to be human being here, you get a completely different result. Wow. Wow. So look how powerful our narrative is. Look how powerful the story that we're operating out of is. And remember, you can have it any way you want it. Right now you're saying you want it like this, but you can have it any way you want it. So to choose our narrative, to choose our paradigm, to begin to expand and open out of this, out of what we have been taught and in modern world paradigm. And that modern world paradigm was superimposed over almost all of humanity. Superimposed, what am I talking about? I'm talking about when those ships sailed and hit all these different parts of the earth and imposed that one understanding of how to be human over every single people that they encountered. So we can call it colonization, including through those residential boarding schools. That was a principal and primary way of doing this, right? So the reason that this is important to me to talk about is I feel like we are at a moment of choice, and we have to examine, well, let me back off of that. It would serve it would serve our ability to participate fully in the very highest possibility for life, light, and love, to really examine what are the stories that we're operating out of. So for myself, as I look at that idea that I am synonymous with earth, I am synonymous with life. I had elders from the Sierra Nevadas, the indigenous peoples of the Sierra Nevadas in Colombia, who to me are some of the elders, because they had the very least amount of outside world contact. They were some of the least colonized people that I know of on the planet that are willing to engage with the outside world. And they said to me, you must move and speak and act with the authority of the mother. They're talking to me as the female of our kind. You must move and speak and act with the authority of the mother. That's your role right now. And I took that in deeply, and I've been studying it. What does that mean? What does that mean to move and speak and act with the authority of the mother? So they're talking about the Mother Earth. And what I feel that is saying is she's backing me up, but only really if I can see myself as synonymous with her, and it's only if I can see and feel and know myself as synonymous with life. So that doesn't mean I drag her into my paradigm so that I can have authority and more power in a power over paradigm. No. What that means is I have to align with her. When I align with her and I notice the laws, I'll say, of the construct we are placed in by being placed on earth, when I align with that, I'm moving with her authority. So again, I'm singling out myself as the female of our kind. But what is the story of the sacred masculine as well? What is the sacred masculine truth of aligning with in such a way with earth that medicine, that energetic, causes all life to thrive? Do we know what that is? I think first we have to examine whether or not our story aligns. You know, is our current story causing life to thrive? Is it leading where we want it to go? And if we can say no, then I'm inviting us into this inquiry of trying to understand what is my perfect design for thriving life at this point. So we're going to go into some breakouts here for just a few minutes. And we're going to go into, I guess we'll have to do breakout rooms of 5, looks like, if I got my math right there. And we're going to give each person 2 minutes. And what I'd like to ask you about, and we're going to put that in the chat, correct? What our questions are here. We're asking you to talk a little bit about what's happening to your story right now. What's happening to your story right now at this time? Is it disintegrating? And how does what I just shared fit into what's happening to your story? So we're going to go ahead and go into breakouts of 5. If you want to pass, you certainly can and listen. I encourage you to participate, and we're going to do 2 minutes each. And I don't know if my tech can give everybody, the 2-minute prompt and say, okay, next person, but that would be helpful. So I'm going to hop in the mix with you. I'll end up in some room, and I guess we're ready to go. And we'll put that those questions in the chat for us all. All right, so here we are coming back. I hope you got to meet some new folks and hear some new things. I did. And I got to be with some folks from Australia, and yeah. So I'll just invite, if there's anybody who would like to share a nugget or so of what they heard, you can raise your hand. Let's see. For me, my raise my hand button is in my reactions. I know sometimes it's over in participants. If you look at your buttons at the bottom, you have an opportunity to go into participants and raise hand. So if anybody has a nugget they want to share, looks like Margie, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Pat. I just want to get, I wanted to say to you that I'm a mother and grandmother too, and I weep with you. And so thank you for sharing and for giving me and the other guy I talked to in my group some ideas about what we could do and what is that other paradigm that perhaps we can look at, because this one isn't the way we want it. We do want it to be different. So thank you.
Thanks, Margie. Thank you so much. And Ellen Brown?
Mute. Okay. Yes, thank you. I think we had some similar conversations, Margie. We were all, we're elders, all women, and some of us had grandchildren, some not. But the concerns about what we are leaving, the legacy that we are leaving for our children and our grandchildren. And we talked about just needing to own that. Primarily, it was our generation that has caused that. We need to own that. We need to do what we can, and we need to teach our children and our grandchildren to respect our Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll take one more reflection here from our groups. We'll go with Susan Hartley. Let's see.
There
you go.
I was wondering if there's any place I can find out if the Iowa Sac and Fox people who were part of a residential school in Highland, Kansas, or what became Highland, Kansas, it was not that originally, if there was any record of any deaths there. All right.
So here's my understanding, Susan, is that we have a new, amazingly, right? We have a new Department of Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, and she has called for an investigation of the residential boarding schools in the United States now, because the ones that we're talking about were First Nations, as they say, in Canada. And so now there's a call for it here in the United States. So I don't know I will say that I did see the list of schools that were proposed for us to be searched, I guess we'll say. And the school that my parents and grandparents went to was not on that list. So that's a little something I have to, bring up with them. But I guess we're gonna see. And I want to point out that this is like the first time that the United States is going to be acknowledging anything that I'm aware of, anything that has happened that they've been a part of that way. So gosh, I would hope to leave a little time for a question. I could take one question, and it looks like Abigail, looks like you're going to be it. We're about at the end of our time, but let's go for this one question just to say I did. So you're muted, darling. There you go. You're still muted. Oh, now I muted you. Sorry.
I was hoping to learn what we could do, a prayer, an atonement, a practice, something. I wanted to learn more from you about connecting more with Earth. And, I'm torn because I don't know how to ask the question. I feel that you've raised my awareness about I'm synonymous with Earth, but how do I practice that?
But now what, huh?
Yeah, but now what? I mean, and so, I'm 64 years old almost, and, I weep when I hear you speak. I want to cry my eyes out.
Okay.
When I think about what was done, what do we do? I mean, how do we atone for that? How do we pray? I don't know. I'm just lost.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Abigail. So we have like a minute in which we're also supposed to say goodbye. So I'm going to point one to a YouTube, and I don't know if it's under Woman Stand Shining or Pat McCabe, but it's called First Ceremony. It's called First Ceremony. And so that's describing how I would approach beginning to have this conversation with Earth. Masculine, feminine, two-spirit, anywhere in there, it's the way. And I'm also going to call on all of us here to do what you can to really press that this inquiry about the residential boarding schools in the U.S. take place. Because I don't know if you're noticing this, but I'm noticing that we get promised a lot of stuff and then we don't see it happen. Nobody feels all that accountable to their word at this moment in government that I can see. And so if we call for it, if we stay persistent, ask your representatives, senators, etc., hey, what happened to that? Where is that? I need to see that. That would be helpful. So thank you so much for joining this session. I know we're right at time, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Thank you so much, everybody.
I don't know if I am unmuted, but I think I put the link of the YouTube, Pat, in the chat. It's a short video. I just Googled it or YouTubed it really fast to look for it. And I have, ever since I was introduced to Pat, when she spoke at a conference, SDI conference in May, I was riveted and I started YouTubing and listening to everything she had to say. So I deeply appreciate being here today with you and thank everyone here who was holding the space and joining in witnessing and transforming together for hopefully another paradigm. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. My honor. Blessings all the way around.
Thank you, everybody.